I never imagined the words that would finally break me would come from my own child. Not anger, not disappointment, but this. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You'd be better off dead." No shouting, no tears, just cold certainty. In that moment, I realized something painful but undeniable. Some relationships do not deserve saving, and some support has to end for your own survival. This is a story of the day I stopped funding my daughter and started choosing myself. Before this story goes any further, if you believe words have consequences, and that self-respect sometimes means walking away even from family, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. These stories aren't easy to tell, but they matter, and your support helps them reach people who need to hear them. Now, let me tell you what happened next. I used to believe that no matter what happened in life, family was the one thing that couldn't be taken from you. Jobs came and went. Friends drifted. Money disappeared faster than you expected. But blood, I thought, was permanent. Blood meant loyalty. Blood meant forgiveness. Blood meant that even when things broke, they could always be repaired. I was wrong. The day my daughter told me I would be better off dead did not start with shouting or tears or some dramatic argument. It began quietly, almost deceptively normal. The kind of day that gives you no warning it's about to permanently divide your life into before and after. I remember the morning clearly. I woke up before the sun, the way I always did, my body trained by decades of routine. The house was silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic waking up the city. I made coffee, black, no sugar, and sat at the kitchen table scrolling through my phone, checking bank notifications, bills, reminders. It was the same routine I'd followed for years, especially since my wife passed away. Keeping busy kept the grief manageable. My daughter's name appeared more often than anything else in those notifications. Tuition payments, rent assistance, credit card balances I didn't recognize but paid anyway. Emergency transfers labeled temporary, though they never were. I told myself this was what being a parent meant. You give until it hurts, then you give some more. She was my only child. I had raised her with the belief that she would always be safe, always supported. When her mother died, I doubled down on that promise. I became both parents, or at least I tried. I worked longer hours, delayed retirement, drained savings I once thought were untouchable. Every sacrifice felt justified if it kept her life stable. But stability, I learned, can turn into entitlement without you noticing. The message from her came around noon. "Can you come by later? We need to talk." The words didn't alarm me at first. She'd used them before, usually when there was another financial problem. She didn't want to explain over text. Still, something about the phrasing sat heavy in my chest. There was no please or love you at the end. Just a statement, a demand. I replied that I would come by after work. All afternoon, my focus drifted. I found myself replaying old memories of her as a child. The way she used to wait by the window when she knew I was coming home. How she'd run to the door barefoot, no matter the weather. I remembered teaching her how to ride a bike. How she cried when she fell. How she trusted me completely to catch her. That trust was something I carried with me everywhere. It was the foundation of every decision I made for her. When I arrived at her apartment, I noticed immediately that something had changed. The place looked more expensive than the last time I'd been there. New furniture, new electronics. The kind of upgrades that didn't match the job she claimed barely covered her expenses. I made a mental note, but said nothing. I didn't want to start the conversation defensively. She didn't offer me a seat. She stood by the kitchen counter, arms crossed, her phone face down beside her. Her expression was tight, irritated, like I was already disappointing her just by being there. "We need to talk about money," she said. I nodded. "Okay, what's going on?" She exhaled sharply, like she'd been holding in frustration for weeks. "I can't live like this anymore." I asked what she meant. She started listing everything that was wrong in her life. Her job didn't pay enough. Her apartment wasn't good enough. Her friends were doing better than her. Everyone else had help from their parents except her, she said, as if the irony wasn't staggering. I reminded her gently that I had been paying most of her bills for years. That's not the point, she snapped. You don't understand what it's like to struggle. The word stung, but I swallowed the reaction. I told myself she was stressed. I told myself grief and pressure can twist people. I asked her what she needed. She named a number. It was more than my monthly income. I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, to say she was exaggerating. She didn't. I can't do that, I said carefully. I'm already stretched thin. I'm close to retirement. I need to think about. She cut me off. You always say that. Because it's true. Her face hardened. So you're choosing yourself over your own daughter. I felt something shift inside me then, a quiet crack. I've been choosing you for decades, I said. I just can't get what I don't have. That's when she said it. Not loudly, not in anger. Almost casually, like she was stating an obvious fact she'd already accepted. You know, she said, the best gift you could give me is if you just died. The room went silent. I remember the way the air felt heavier, like my lungs forgot how to work. I remember staring at her, searching her face for some sign that she hadn't meant it, that it was a cruel joke, that she would take it back the second she saw the damage it caused. She didn't. She met my eyes without hesitation. No remorse. No regret. I felt something inside me collapse. Not break. Collapse. Like a structure that had been hollowed out over years without me noticing, finally giving way. I asked her to repeat herself. She rolled her eyes. You heard me. If you weren't around, at least I'd get the inheritance and wouldn't have to keep begging. Begging. That word echoed in my head. I realized then that the man she was talking to was not her father. He was an obstacle, a delay, a wallet that refused to empty fast enough. I don't remember raising my voice. I don't remember crying. I remember feeling very calm, in a way that scared me later. I told her I needed to leave. She shrugged. Do whatever you want. Just don't expect me to struggle because you're selfish. Selfish. I walked out of her apartment without another word. The drive home was a blur. Traffic lights changed. Cars passed. Music played on the radio, but none of it registered. My mind replayed her words again and again, each time cutting deeper, stripping away years of excuses I had made for her behavior. When I got home, I sat in the dark living room for hours. I didn't turn on a light. I didn't eat. I just sat there, listening to the clock tick, feeling the weight of something final settling into place. That night, I slept poorly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face as she said it, calm and certain. I realized that if I died tomorrow, she would not mourn me. She would calculate. The next morning, I opened my laptop and logged into my bank accounts. For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilt. I felt clarity. I began making changes. I canceled automatic transfers. I removed her as an authorized user. I froze cards I had opened in my name for her convenience. Each click felt heavy, but also grounding, like reclaiming pieces of myself I had given away without question. When my phone rang, I let it go to voicemail. When the messages started coming in, angry, panicked, demanding, I didn't respond. I wasn't ready yet. Part of me still needed to grieve the daughter I thought I had. And part of me was finally accepting that love without boundaries can become a form of self-destruction. That realization would change everything. The first thing I noticed after I cut her off was the silence. For years, my phone had been a constant source of tension. Every vibration carried the possibility of another emergency, another request wrapped in urgency, another reminder that my life was no longer my own. I had lived in a permanent state of readiness, as if parenthood meant never being allowed to rest. Now the silence felt unnatural, too quiet, almost dangerous. That first morning after I canceled the transfers, I woke up before my alarm. My chest felt tight, not with panic, but with anticipation. I checked my phone before my feet even touched the floor. 6 missed calls, 12 messages, all from her. I didn't open them right away. I made coffee. I stood by the kitchen window and watched the skies slowly lighten, the way I used it when my wife was alive and mornings felt shared instead of endured. For a moment, I let myself breathe without the pressure of knowing I owed someone something. Then I sat down and read the messages. The first few were confused. Why didn't the rent go through? Did the bank mess up? Call me. Then came irritation. Are you ignoring me? This isn't funny. I need this fix today. By the 10th message, the tone shifted again. This is serious. You're messing with my life. I trusted you. I stared at the words for a long time. Trusted you. Trust had once meant something sacred between us. Now it sounded like ownership, like a contract I had signed without realizing it, one that obligated me to bleed quietly so she could live comfortably. I did not reply. Instead, I got dressed and went to work. That day, everything felt sharper. Conversations sounded clearer. The air felt lighter. I caught myself standing straighter, as if a physical weight had been removed from my shoulders. I also felt the grief underneath it all, simmering quietly, waiting for moments of stillness to surface. At lunch, I sat alone in my car and thought about the last few years with brutal honesty. I thought about the times she only called when she needed something, the way she dismissed my health concerns, the birthdays she forgot, the holidays she shortened because she had plans. I had told myself she was busy, that young people didn't communicate the way they used to, that love didn't need constant proof. But love should never feel like erasure. The calls continued throughout the afternoon. By the time I got home, there were over 20 missed calls and more messages than I wanted to count. I listened to one voicemail. Her voice was frantic now. You can't do this to me. I have bills. I have responsibilities. If something happens, it's on you. I sat down heavily on the couch. That sentence sealed something inside me. For the first time, I understood that she didn't see me as a father. She saw me as a buffer between herself and consequences. And now that buffer was gone, that evening, I finally responded. Not to argue, not to explain, just to state a boundary that should have existed years ago. I will not be sending you any more money. What you said to me was unforgivable. I need space. Do not contact me unless you are ready to take responsibility for your own life. I stared at the screen for a long time before sending it. When I did, my hands did not shake. Her response came almost immediately. You're overreacting. I didn't mean it like that. You're being dramatic. I closed the phone and placed it face down on the table. That night, the grief arrived fully. I cried in a way I hadn't since my wife died. Not loud sobs, but deep, body-shaking waves that left me exhausted and hollow. I cried for the little girl she used to be. I cried for the man I had been, bending himself into something smaller to keep her comfortable. I cried for the years I could not get back. But somewhere in that grief was resolve. The next few days were brutal. She showed up at my house unannounced. I watched from the window as she stood on the porch, pounding on the door, her face twisted in rage and desperation. I did not open it. She sent messages accusing me of abuse, of abandonment, of being a terrible father. Each word was designed to pierce guilt into me, to make me doubt myself, to force me back into compliance. It almost worked. Years of conditioning don't disappear overnight. I found myself drafting replies I never sent, explanations she didn't deserve. I reminded myself again and again of the words she had spoken so casually, so cruelly. You'd be better off dead. Those words became my anchor to reality. A week after the cutoff, my sister called. I heard from your daughter, she said carefully. She's not doing well. I closed my eyes. She said I should die. There was a pause, a long one. I didn't know that my sister said quietly. Now you do. That conversation marked a turning point. For the first time, I stopped protecting my daughter's image. I stopped editing the truth to make her look better. I told my sister everything. The money, the manipulation, the comment. Silence filled the line again, heavier this time. You don't deserve that, my sister said finally. Hearing it from someone else felt like permission to believe it myself. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of loss and rediscovery. Without the financial drain, I began to stabilize. I paid down debt I'd ignored for years. I scheduled medical appointments I had postponed. I slept better. Emotionally, the waves came and went. Some days I felt strong. Other days, the absence of my daughter felt like a physical ache. I missed who she used to be, or maybe who I thought she was. Then came the call that changed everything again. She left a voicemail late one night. Her voice slurred with exhaustion or something stronger. "This is your fault," she said. "Everything is falling apart. If I lose my apartment, if I lose my job, that's on you. I hope you're happy." I listened to it twice, and then something inside me hardened. I realized that no amount of money would ever be enough for her. No sacrifice would satisfy someone who believed they were owed your life. The next morning, I met with a financial advisor. For the first time, the conversation was about my future, not hers. Retirement, stability, boundaries. I began building a life that didn't revolve around fear. And slowly, quietly, I began to feel something unexpected. Relief. There's a moment after you draw a boundary for the first time when your mind tries to punish you for it. That moment came for me about a month after I cut my daughter off. By then, the chaos had quieted on the surface. The nonstop calls had slowed. The messages became less frequent, less explosive. From the outside, it looked like things were settling down. But inside me, something else was happening. The guilt began to mutate. It no longer screamed. It whispered. It whispered when I cooked dinner for one and realized I no longer bought the food she liked just in case she visited. It whispered when I passed the aisle in the store where I used to pick up little things for her, snacks, gifts, things I hoped would make her smile. It whispered when I saw fathers and daughters laughing together in public places, unaware of how fragile that bond could be. You are abandoning her, the guilt said. She's struggling, and you're choosing comfort over responsibility. A real parent wouldn't do this. I had to fight those thoughts daily. What saved me was writing things down. One night, I sat at my desk and opened a blank notebook. On the first page, I wrote exactly what she had said to me, word for word. No softening, no reinterpretation. You'd be better off dead. Seeing it in ink removed all ambiguity. There was no tone to misread, no context to excuse it, just cruelty. On the next page, I listed everything I had given her over the years, not to keep score, but to confront reality. The tuition payments, the rent, the credit cards, the emergencies that were never emergencies, the vacations she took while I postponed my own life. The list went on for pages. By the time I finished, my hands were aching, but my mind was clearer. This wasn't abandonment. This was survival. A few days later, I ran into an old friend at a coffee shop. We hadn't spoken in years, not because of conflict, but because my life had shrunk to the size of my daughter's needs. There hadn't been room for friendships. We talked awkwardly at first, catching up on surface details. Jobs, health, the usual safe topics. Then he asked about my daughter. I hesitated. For years, I had presented her as successful, independent, doing well. That image wasn't for others. It was for me. She and I aren't speaking right now. I said, finally. He studied my face. That sounds serious. I surprised myself by telling the truth. Not all of it. Just enough. When I finished, he shook his head slowly. That's not a daughter problem, he said. That's a boundaries problem that went on too long. The words landed harder than I expected, because they were right. I had taught her how to treat me. I had taught her that my role was to absorb discomfort, so she didn't have to. I had taught her that my limits were flexible, negotiable, ignorable. And when I finally said no, she experienced it as betrayal. That realization hurt more than anything else. It meant I had to take responsibility not just for my pain, but for my part in creating the dynamic that led to it. That was not an easy thing to accept. Around that time, she reached out again. The message was different. "I've been thinking," she wrote. "Maybe we should talk. Like adults." I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me wanted to believe this was growth, that she had reflected, that she understood the damage she had caused. Another part of me recognized the timing. Her rent was due. I responded cautiously. "I'm open to talking if the goal is accountability and respect, not money." There was a long delay before her reply. "Why are you being so cold?" she wrote. "I'm your daughter." There it was. The title, the leverage, the implication of the role I played erased my right to self-respect. "I'm being firm," I replied. "There's a difference." We agreed to meet in a public place, a cafe halfway between our homes, neutral territory. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked thinner, tired. Her confidence, once so sharp, was dulled by something closer to fear. For a moment, my resolve wavered. Then she spoke. She didn't apologize. She talked about how hard things had been for her, how stressed she was, how unfair it was that I had pulled the rug out from under her. She spoke as if I had committed an act of violence against her stability. I listened quietly. When she finished, she looked at me expectantly. I asked her one question. "Do you understand why what you said to me was wrong?" She frowned. "I already told you I didn't mean it like that." "That's not an answer." She sighed, frustrated. "You're still stuck on that?" Stuck, as if wishing death on someone was a minor inconvenience, a misunderstanding, a footnote. Something inside me settled. "I didn't come here to argue," I said calmly. "I came to see if you were capable of taking responsibility." She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, the same posture she had used the day everything broke. "I said something out of anger," she said. "You're a parent. You're supposed to be able to handle that." There was again the belief that my humanity was optional. I stood up. Her eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "I have my answer," I said. She scoffed. "So that's it? You're just going to walk away?" "I already walked away," I said. This was me checking whether it was permanent. She didn't follow me out. That hurt more than I expected. The weeks after that meeting were quieter. Not peaceful, but quieter. I stopped checking my phone constantly. I started filling my time with things I had neglected. I took long walks. I joined a local group for people nearing retirement. I laughed more than I had in years. And slowly, something else emerged. Anger. Not explosive anger. Focused anger. Anger at myself for allowing someone to reduce me to a resource. Anger at the culture that told parents they had to endure emotional abuse to prove their love. Anger at the idea that boundaries were somehow unloving. That anger fueled change. I updated my will, not out of spite, but out of clarity. I removed assumptions. I documented intentions. I ensured that my legacy would not reward cruelty. When my daughter found out, she lost control. She sent messages accusing me of punishment, of revenge, of trying to control her even now. The irony was staggering. For the first time, I didn't respond at all. I realized then that silence was no longer avoidance. It was strength, and the person I was becoming could not coexist with the dynamic I had lived in for decades. That understanding would soon be tested in ways I never anticipated. People don't talk enough about what happens after you choose yourself. They talk about empowerment, about freedom, about relief. And those things are real, but they're incomplete. What they don't tell you is that choosing yourself often comes with delayed cost, a quiet reckoning that arrives when the adrenaline fades and you're left alone with the reality of what you've done. For me, that reckoning came in waves. The first wave was social. Word got around faster than I expected. Families talk. Friends talk. People who barely know the story fill in the gaps with assumptions. Suddenly, I wasn't just a father who had set boundaries. I was a man who had cut off his daughter, a phrase heavy with judgment and implication. At gatherings, conversations shifted when I walked into a room. Some people avoided the topic altogether, offering polite smiles and shallow small talk. Others asked pointed questions disguised as a concern. How's your daughter doing? Have you two worked things out yet? Kids say things they don't mean, you know. Each question carried the same underlying message. You should fix this. You should bend. You should absorb the pain quietly so everyone else can stay comfortable. At first, I tried explaining. I shared pieces of the truth, carefully selected, hoping understanding would follow. Sometimes it did. Often it didn't. One evening, at a family dinner, an older relative pulled me aside. She's young, he said. You're supposed to be the bigger person. I looked at him for a long moment. How big? I asked. He frowned. What do you mean? How much of myself am I supposed to erase to earn that title? He didn't have an answer. That was the night I stopped explaining. The second wave was internal. Without the constant chaos of managing my daughter's crises, there was suddenly space. Too much space. Space for memories. Space for regret. Space for questions I had avoided for years. I began replaying moments from her childhood with a new lens. Times when I had said yes when I should have said no. Times when I had stepped in to fix things she could have learned from. Times when my guilt over her mother's death had overridden my better judgment. I had told myself I was protecting her. But protection without accountability doesn't build strength. It builds dependency. That realization was devastating. I wasn't just grieving the relationship I had lost. I was grieving the version of myself who believed love alone was enough, who believed sacrifice was inherently noble, who believed that endurance equaled virtue. Those beliefs had cost me more than money. They had cost me my sense of self. Around that time, my health began to demand attention. Years of stress had left their mark. High blood pressure, chronic fatigue, a persistent tightness in my chest that no amount of rest seemed to fix. My doctor didn't mince words. You've been living in fight or flight for a long time, he said. Your body doesn't know how to relax anymore. That sentence hit harder than any accusation. Fight or flight. That was exactly how parenting my daughter had felt for years. Every call a potential emergency. Every conversation a negotiation. Every refusal a threat of emotional fallout. I had normalized it. Recovery, I learned, wasn't just emotional. It was physical. I started therapy. Not because I thought I was broken, but because I needed language for what I had lived through. I needed tools to dismantle patterns that felt automatic. In those sessions, I learned something uncomfortable. Love can coexist with harm. You can love someone deeply and still be damaged by them. You can want the best for them and still need distance. These truths aren't opposites. They are parallel realities. Accepting that allowed me to stop vilifying myself. The third wave came unexpectedly. It came in the form of my daughter's absence. Not her anger, not her demands, but the complete lack of curiosity about my life. Weeks passed, then months. No questions about my health. No acknowledgement of my birthday. No attempt at reconciliation that didn't revolve around her needs. The silence spoke louder than any insult. I realized then that our relationship had been transactional for longer than I wanted to admit. When the transaction stopped, so did the connection. That truth hurt in a way that was both sharp and clarifying. One afternoon, while cleaning out old boxes in garage, I found a stack of cards she had made as a child. Crayon drawings. Misspelled words. Declarations of love written with the confidence only children possess. I sat on the floor and cried, not because I wanted to pass back, but because I finally understood that the child I had loved and the adult she had become were not the same person. Holding them together in my mind had kept me trapped. Letting go meant grieving both. As time went on, my life began to take shape around choices that were mine alone. I traveled for the first time in years. Nothing extravagant, just quiet places where no one needed anything from me. I reconnected with friends I had neglected. I laughed without checking my phone afterward, bracing for fallout. I learned what peace actually felt like. And then, just as I began to believe the hardest part was behind me, reality tested me again. My daughter showed up at my door, not angry, not demanding, crying. She looked smaller somehow, stripped of the confidence that once insulated her from consequences. For a split second, every protective instinct roared back to life. I opened the door. That decision would challenge everything I had worked to rebuild. When I opened the door and saw my daughter standing there, crying, my first instinct was the one I had spent a lifetime cultivating. Fix it. Make it better. Absorb the pain so she doesn't have to. That instinct surged through me with a force that nearly knocked me off balance. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. My shoulders tensed. My breath shortened. Every cell in me prepared to resume the role I had finally stepped out of. But something stopped me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pride. It was memory. The memory of her standing in her apartment, arms crossed, telling me I would be better off dead. The memory of the weeks of silence that followed once the money stopped. The memory of how quickly she had disappeared when I no longer served a purpose. Those memories didn't harden me. They grounded me. I stepped aside and let her in. She didn't look around the house the way she used to, assessing upgrades or noticing what was new. She moved straight to the couch and sat down heavily, like someone who had been carrying weight too long, and finally set it down. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she broke. "I don't know what to do anymore," she said through tears. Everything fell apart. I waited. She looked at me, maybe expecting reassurance, maybe expecting rescue. When it didn't come immediately, she continued, "I lost the apartment. I'm staying with a friend, but it's temporary. My job cut my hours. I'm behind on everything." There it was, the inventory of collapse. I listened carefully, not just to what she was saying, but to what she wasn't. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the pain she had caused, no recognition of my humanity, just crisis, just need. I asked her one question. "What are you taking responsibility for?" She blinked. "What do you mean?" I said slowly, "What part of this do you believe is yours to own?" Her face tightened. "Why are you doing this right now?" "Because this moment matters." She stood up abruptly. "I didn't come here to be interrogated. I came here because you're my father." I nodded. "And I didn't invite you here to be used." The words hung between us, heavy and undeniable. She stared at me like she didn't recognize me. "You've changed," she said. "Yes," I replied. "I have." She laughed bitterly. "So what? You're just going to let me fail?" The question was loaded. It carried decades of expectation inside it. I took a breath. "I'm going to let you live your life," I said, "and I'm going to live mine." Her tears turned to anger. "You're punishing me." "No," I said. "I'm refusing to participate in something that's destroying both of us." She paced the room, running her hands through her hair. "You're supposed to help me." "I did," I said, "for years. And it didn't help you become stronger. It helped you become dependent." She stopped pacing and looked at me, truly looked at me, maybe for the first time in a long while. "You're choosing this over me," she said quietly. I shook my head. "I'm choosing myself. There's a difference." Silence filled the room again. This silence was different from the others we'd shared. It wasn't charged with anger or fear. It was heavy with realization. She sat back down. "I don't know how to do this on my own," she admitted. That was the first honest thing she had said since walking through the door. I felt compassion rise in me, warm and genuine. But compassion no longer meant capitulation. I believe you, I said, and I still won't finance your life. She looked away, wiping her face. Then why did you let me in? Because boundaries don't require cruelty, I said, and distance doesn't have to mean indifference. We talked for a long time that night, not about money, about expectations, about grief, about the years after her mother died, and how neither of us had known how to navigate that loss, about the roles we had fallen into without questioning them. For the first time, the conversation wasn't transactional. It was uncomfortable. It was raw. It was incomplete. And that was okay. When she left, she didn't ask for money. That alone told me something had shifted. But I didn't fool myself into believing everything was fixed. Growth isn't proven by words spoken in crisis. It's proven by choices made when no one is watching. In the weeks that followed, we kept limited contact. Texts, short calls, no financial involvement. I offered guidance when asked, resources, suggestions, but not rescue. She struggled, and that was the point. Watching her struggle was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Every instinct in me wanted to intervene, to smooth the path, to make the pain stop. But I stayed where I was, steady and present without being intrusive. Slowly, she adapted. She found a smaller place, took on extra shifts, made compromises she once considered beneath her. Life stopped revolving around what she deserved and started revolving around what she earned. And I changed too. I learned that love does not require self-erasure, that boundaries are not walls, but frameworks, that being a parent does not mean forfeiting dignity. Months later, she said something that told me everything. I didn't realize how much you were doing for me, she said quietly, or how little I was doing for myself. It wasn't an apology, but it was accountability, and that mattered. Today, our relationship is different. Not perfect, not what it once was, but real. I no longer fund her life. I no longer fear her disappointment. I no longer confuse sacrifice with love. What I left behind was not my daughter. I left behind a version of myself who believed his worth was measured by what he could give away. And what I kept was something far more valuable. Myself that I didn't cut her off out of revenge. I cut her off out of self-preservation. Love does not mean accepting cruelty. And being a parent does not mean being a doormat. The money stopped, but what really ended that day was a belief that blood excuses everything. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose peace over people, you're not alone. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the hardest goodbye is the one that saves you.